Hello, I'm John. Welcome back to my channel, Must Read More. Today I'm going to do a 2-week reading wrap-up. I have 7 books to share with you, but one of them is a science fiction double. And I've had a pretty good couple of weeks reading. Now today I am kind of under the weather. I don't feel miserable or anything. I'm just kind of, I don't know, I feel really drained. And so this might not be as in-depth as I would like it to be. I'm going to try my hardest to talk about these books, but I'm not sure if I can go as in-depth as I'd really like to. So, the first book I read was Georgette Hare's Envious Casca. I believe this was published first in 1941, and it takes place in a big house, a big estate house in England, and there's a grumpy old man. They're kind of new money. He's an industrialist who has made all this money. And he has a family. He has a brother and a nephew and a niece. And his brother is this really ingratiating kind of guy who's always positive and always interpreting everybody's actions as so much nicer than they are. So he wants to throw a Christmas party, and he invites all these relatives and the old guy's business partner to the house. And his nephew stands to inherit all the money in the house, or most of the money in the house. His niece is an actress, a stage actress, who wants her uncle to finance a play, and she's brought along a playwright with this kind of inflammatory play for the time. And his business partner shows up, some other relatives show up, and they are all just terribly rude, insulting people. They all hate each other. They all insult each other all the time. And I mean, these are serious insults. These aren't like, just little comments. I mean, they are just really, really insulting to each other. And it makes you wonder why they've all showed up. If they hate each other so much, why did they even show up? And the only real answer is that they're hoping to get something out of each other or out of the old rich guy. And the old rich guy says, well, he's really annoyed by this playwright and his play. He's really annoyed by having all these people at his house. And he decides he's going to go up to his room and take a bath before dinner. And he doesn't come down. So they go up and check on him, and he's been stabbed to death in a locked room. So it's a locked room mystery. And they call the police. They don't want to, but they do. And now we're left with all these suspects who all pretty well have a motive. And I really like the way that Georgette Hare, I really like her writing style. It's kind of a slow burn, but it's very descriptive. And she really, really does dialogue and the characters very well. It was very well fleshed out. And I think that she had a really good idea of what she was trying to do with this story. I think she had a really good idea of which character was which and what they wanted and what they expected. And I think she had it all planned out before she started writing this, which doesn't always seem to be the case with mystery writers. And I really liked the way that she was able to shift focus from one character to another so that I was never really sure who the murderer was. I had a good idea, and then I would think, well, it's somebody else. And then I think, well, it can't be her because of this. That was really well done. I thought so. And I was really glad that I read this. I've read another book by Georgette Hare. It was Footsteps in the Dark. I really liked that one also. And I'm really looking forward to reading more of her books in the future. They're a little bit hard to find. I find her romance novels pretty often, but I just don't find her mysteries very often. So hopefully I can find some more in the future. The next book I read was Tim Lebbon's Desolation, and I liked the premise of this book. I liked the characters in this book. I liked the ending of this book. I just didn't really like the, from A to B. It felt to me like Lebbon had an idea of the characters he wanted to write, and he had an idea of the beginning and the ending and the basic plot, but it seemed a little bit muddled to me in the middle. It felt to me like the middle of this book could have been fleshed out a lot better. So the basic plot is that there's this young guy, he's about 20, 21, 22, somewhere in there, and he has spent the last several years living at a mental institution. And the reason is that when he was a kid, his father would lock him in a room in the house for quite a long time with this, and anytime he would do something that his father didn't want him to do, which he wouldn't tell him what he didn't want him to do, the siren would blare in his blare, and so he would, sometimes he would sit for weeks on end doing nothing in this room. And sometimes his father would let him out, and they would have these conversations, and he would encourage him to read all these textbooks and that kind of thing about certain subjects but not others. So he really never got to go outside. He never got to be a kid. He never got to be around other kids. And then one day his father died when he was about, I think he said about 17, somewhere in there. And since he was kind of, so out of touch with the real world, they sent him to live in this mental institution. And now they've sent him to live in this apartment house. And one by one, it becomes apparent that the people in this apartment are not normal. They're not normal people. They all have different things going on. And it becomes apparent that each of them has different powers. And they're not using them for good. They're using them for selfish reasons. And it's just possible that our main character may also have some kind of powers. And like I said, I just don't think that was used to its full potential. I feel that could have been fleshed out better. And I felt that some of the scenes in this book were really well done. I was really interested in the whole, what his father was up to, finding out what his father was up to, and finding out what these people were up to. I just kind of felt like it wasn't pulled off the best. And it was okay. It was an okay read, but I don't think I'd read it again. The next book I read was I Protest, Sahn, Vietnam by David Douglas Duncan. Duncan was a war reporter who had worked at this point for almost 20 years as a war photographer. He worked through World War II, through the Korean War and that kind of thing. And he was sent by, I think he was with CBS. He was sent to Khe Sanh in Vietnam. Khe Sanh was a fire base in the jungle, and it was surrounded by the enemy on all sides, basically. And the only way in or out was through the airstrip, through helicopters and airplanes. And the siege went on for quite a while. He spent a week there, or I think 8 days, and he photographed all of it and talked to people and everything. And he came away from that experience feeling that the war was, first of all, he came away feeling that the politicians and the top brass were lying to the American people about the conduct of the Vietnam War. He didn't like the way that there was no real set goals around this war, how at this point it had just become a war of racking up body counts. He didn't like how they were expending all these resources, all this money, all these weapons, and all these lives just defending these bases in the middle of nowhere that really had not a whole great deal of strategic value as far as he could see. And he just thought that the war was going about very differently from World War II, from Korea. He didn't like what he saw, so he sat down and he wrote a few pages about his feelings about the war, and they published this book. This is from 1968. This was published either during or right after the siege ended. And I don't know a whole lot about the strategies of the Vietnam War. I've read quite a bit about the Vietnam War, but it's always been from the human perspective. From, they've been soldiers' memoirs and that kind of thing. And I do know a little bit about what was going on back in the United States between, President Johnson and the Joint Chiefs of Staffs and that kind of thing. But I really don't know a whole lot about the actual overall conduct of the war. So I'd wanted to go more in depth with this, but I really don't know enough to do that. It's really short. It's only a couple of pages long. And then it goes straight into the pictures. And his pictures are really nice. Some of them have become iconic. Here we have, looks like an F-4 Phantom. I believe that's what it is. That was a fighter bomber. And I really do like his pictures, though. Unfortunately, one of the bad things about this format is that in a picture like this, you can't really see the middle. And I'm afraid to open the book because it's kind of, it's from 1968, so I'm afraid to split it in half. But I did enjoy this. I enjoyed reading it, and I liked the pictures. And like I said, it's really nice to live in a society where somebody can voice their opinions, even when they're not popular, when they go against the agreed upon policy of the government. And I liked that. The next book I read was The Siberians by Farley Mowat, and I really enjoyed this book. It was a really nice look into Soviet Russia, and it was really nice to be reminded that the people of a nation are not synonymous with the government of a nation. That the reality is that most people in any nation are just trying to get by. They're not, they can't really affect any real change on the government that represents them. And it was just really nice. Mowat went and met the native peoples of Siberia. He experienced a whole lot of hospitality. They really, really liked to drink. And everywhere he went, they would get him very drunk and feed him all kinds of food. And they took him to look at schools and universities and, hydroelectric plants. And at one point he goes to a diamond mine, I believe, or a diamond ore processing place. He went to Lake Baikal, which is the deepest lake in the world. He met with a lot of poets and writers and painters, and it was really nice. And of course, someone might read it and think, well, they were putting him on, They were just showing him what he wanted to see so he could go back to Canada and tell everybody about how great the Soviet Union was. And there's a little bit of that. There are some people you can tell are just trying to, glorify the Soviet line, glorify the communist ideal. But there are some people who would speak out about it to him. And they felt pretty comfortable doing that. They wouldn't have, for instance, been able to protest in the way that David Douglas Duncan was able to protest. But they were able, in some small cases, to affect a real change, to change a policy that the Soviet government had enacted in this part of their country. For instance, they were able to stop a couple of plants being built on rivers and things like that. So it wasn't massive change, but they did have some say in what went on. Unfortunately, not enough say, because there are, for instance, Norilsk is an extremely polluted city in Siberia. And so there was a great deal of pollution, and there was corruption and that kind of thing. But Mowat was mostly there just to speak with the everyday people, and the poets and the painters and the writers. And he experienced a great deal of hospitality and a great deal of warmth and friendliness. And like I said, it was just a really good reminder that the people of a nation are not synonymous with the government of a nation. Most people are just trying to get by. So I really did enjoy this. The next book I read was is this Tor? Yes, it was a Tor double. Souls by Joanna Russ and Houston, Do You Read by James Tiptree Jr. Which James Tiptree Jr. was a pseudonym for a very accomplished woman, and I can't remember her name. I think her name was Alice. Was her name Alice? Well, anyway, she had been active. She had been active in military intelligence in World War II. I think she was, if I remember right, she spent her time in the military looking at photographs, like photographs taken from planes. And she was, later on, she was in the CIA doing something kind of like that. And she didn't enjoy that, so she quit, and she went to college and got a degree in psychology. She had a very interesting life, and it's worth reading about. I can't remember the specifics. So, Souls is about 1,000 years ago. There's an abbey on the coast of England, I believe, and one day the Vikings show up, and at this abbey lives an abbess who is very, very smart. She started reading when she was about 4. She could read Latin, and she was very intelligent in a way that a normal person would not be. And so a lot of people think that she's a saint, and they sent her off to Rome and to other parts of the world to learn. And then she came back and took over this abbey. And one day the Vikings show up, and it's about how she deals with these Vikings. And towards the end, it becomes a science fiction story. And I really didn't particularly like that. I felt that it was kind of unnecessary to the story. It just didn't make a lot of sense, really, in relation to the rest of the story. I mean, I can see what Joanna Russ was trying to do. I just don't think that it worked very well. I think that maybe she could have done that in a better way. But I did enjoy the story itself. And I think she handled the Abbey and the Vikings really well. It's told from the perspective of a young boy. And I really did enjoy it right up until the end. And the end just really didn't work for me. Now, Houston, Do You Read is about 3 men who have gone on a journey through space. They were going to go around the sun and come back to the Earth. And while they're out there, they encounter a solar flare. And on their way back, the Earth isn't where it's supposed to be. And there's a ship that shouldn't be there, that shouldn't exist. And they're a little bit confused by the people on this ship who don't seem to have the same kind of rigid control structure as they do. And there are women on the ship. And it turns out that these men cannot make it back to Earth with the amount of fuel they have or on the trajectory they're on. So they have to meet up with this ship and go aboard it. And it's unlike anything they've seen. And I'm not going to give the twist away or spoil this one. This is a story that needs to be read because there is a twist to it, and it exposes it takes a really good look at some of the masculine elements that have constructed our society and that have been behind the building of technology and that kind of thing. And I feel like that was really well done. I don't always feel that way about science fiction or about stories or novels with a philosophical or a social agenda. But I really think that this was well done, and I do think people should read it because they are important questions, and I feel that they're just really well done in this book. The next book I read was Fletch by Gregory McDonald. This is quite a bit different from the movie. The movie was a comedy. This is not a comedy. Fletch is not a likable guy. He's a journalist working for a newspaper in Southern California. And when we meet him, he is in the middle of he's gone undercover to work out this drug situation on a beach. And to kind of hopefully find out who's selling the drugs to these people. And we learn pretty fast that he is living in a crappy apartment under an assumed name. Well, not really an assumed name, but he's pretending to be a bum, basically. He's pretending to be a drug addict and a bum. And he's living in the crappy apartment with a 15-year-old junkie hooker. A runaway from her home in, I think, Minnesota. And they are having a relationship. So right away, that's pretty messed up. And Fletch doesn't try to stop her from doing drugs, doing heroin. He doesn't call the cops and say, hey, take this girl home or anything. It's pretty messed up. And then while he's standing on the beach one day, a guy has been staring at him for quite some time and asked him to come over. And the guy says, I need you to do something for me. You look like the kind of guy I need you to do something. You look like the kind of guy I'm looking for. And Fletch says, all right, what is it? Is it illegal? And the guy tells him, well, he hands him a envelope with $1,000 in it. He says, are you interested? And okay. Well, the whole little conversation is here on the front. But the guy asks him to murder him. He asks Fletch to murder him. And the reason he gives him is that he has a terminal illness and he's going to die. And he just wants it to be over quick. And Fletch doesn't buy this. Fletch thinks something's very fishy about this whole situation. So he starts to investigate it. And he's supposed to turn in the story about the drugs on the beach. And he's very, very rude to all the women in this novel. He has 2 ex-wives who are looking for alimony. So they send, attorneys to his office. At one point, one of his wives divorced him because he got annoyed with their cat and threw it out a 7-story window. And Fletch is just not a good guy. He's a liar. He's manipulative. He's selfish. He thinks of nobody else but himself. And I don't know. I mean, it was still a good read. I still enjoyed reading it. But Fletch was not a nice guy, and he was not a pleasant guy, and he didn't do the right thing. But I really felt that Gregory McDonald managed to bring these 2 different sides of this story together, the drug plot and the plot about this rich guy who wants Fletch to kill him, together in a really, really good way that I really didn't see coming. I expected it to come together in a completely different way than it did. And I really liked the way that McDonald ended this book, or the climax and the ending. But like I said, Fletch was not really a pleasant person to read about. And there are quite a few sequels to this book. I didn't know that, but there are quite a few sequels to this one, but I don't think I would look for them. I don't think I would go out of my way to find them. I mean, if I came across one, I might buy it, but I think this one was really enough for me. And the last book I read this week was Kamikaze by Yasou Kuwahara and Gordon T. Allred. And this was a good book, but about halfway through it, I started to kind of have some questions. I started to feel like things were too perfect. Things were too... It's hard to explain, and I thought maybe it was that because Kuwahara only spoke Japanese and Allred had to communicate with him through a translator, and he was also sick. Kuwahara was also sick. But maybe the reason I felt kind of odd about the story wasn't because of Kuwahara's actual life, but because of the way that Allred had written it. But it just got more and more... It read like fiction. It read too much like fiction. It was just too perfect. Okay, it was just too perfect. It was like something out of a movie. It was like something that somebody made up. And I just didn't buy it. So I looked it up on the internet, and there are several different websites that go in about this book. And there are some pretty glaring mistakes. First of all is that the airstrip, the airfield where Kuwahara claimed that he learned to fly an airplane, where he went through this brutal training and where he would become a fighter pilot, it didn't exist. There was a military structure there, but there was never an airport or an airstrip there, ever. And some of his dates don't add up at all. Some of the attacks that he made or that he watched being made on American ships did not happen anytime near the day they said it was. He claims that his friend sank a tanker on a Kamikaze run, and apparently there was never a tanker sank by a Kamikaze. Just things like that. And later on, somebody did meet up with a couple of people who went to school with Kuwahara, and they said that he never won a glider contest. He was never the top glider pilot in the country, and he worked in a factory. So it kind of leaves me wondering, how much was Kuwahara... What I'm trying to say is, how much did Allred know about Kuwahara's story, really? Did he just accept it? Did he just see what he wanted to see? Did he just accept Kuwahara's story as the truth? He claims in the beginning of this story that there are documents that prove Kuwahara's story, but, we're not given any insight into them. And I wonder how would Allred have been able to authenticate any documents given to him? He couldn't speak Japanese, so it's pretty unlikely that he could read Japanese. And it just left me wondering, did Allred know that Kuwahara was lying and just write this book anyway? And that is a problem with these books like this, these war memoirs, is that sometimes they're completely honest. sometimes the people involved are telling the complete truth, as they saw it, as it happened to them. And then other times, and I've read a couple more books that turned out to be, you know, made up. Some of them which were pretty well fraudulent, honestly. And that's always the trouble. It's kind of on the honor system. You have to take it as a matter of trust that the person writing the book is telling the truth. I don't know. It's kind of irritating because we can't really know the truth, I mean, it's pretty clear that Kuwahara probably never was a pilot. He just made this story up, right? What I'm wondering about is how complicit Allred was in that. It was still a good book. I mean, it was interesting. It kept me interested. It was written pretty well. I just feel like if he wanted to write a novel, he should have just written a novel, I don't know. It was okay. It was okay. I mean, just realize, you just have to know that there are some factual errors and some issues in this, and that it's likely that it's just completely made up. So those are the books I've been reading over this past couple of weeks. I kind of wanted to go more in depth than I was able to, but I'm starting to feel kind of worse and worse as this goes along. I have another part of my bookshelf tour, which we'll be posting sometime this coming week, probably on Thursday. I'm going to try to do a tag video for Tag Tuesday, and I'd hope to say more during this video. There's just some little interesting things about filming videos and being on BookTube, but I just don't feel up to it. And hopefully I'll be able to do that in my next wrap-up video. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll feel better soon, and I'll see you next time.